The hot summer sun bore down on 12-year-old Jamal as he stood behind his small lemonade stand, carefully pouring a fresh glass for a smiling customer. His little hands moved swiftly, his face beaming with pride as he handed the cup to an elderly woman who had stopped by for a drink. "You keep this up, young man, and you'll own a business one day," she said, handing him a $5 bill. "Keep the change." Jamal's heart swelled with joy. "Thank you, ma'am," he chirped, his excitement barely contained. He had started this lemonade stand to save up for a new bicycle. His mother worked 2 jobs to support them, and he didn't want to burden her with the expense. So he took matters into his own hands. Across the street, Karen Caldwell watched him from her pristine front porch, her lips pursed in disapproval. She was a self-proclaimed neighborhood watchdog, always ready to enforce what she considered the right kind of order. To her, Jamal's lemonade stand was an eyesore, a disruption in what she deemed her perfect, quiet neighborhood. With a tight grip on her phone, she dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report some suspicious activity," she said, lowering her voice to sound more urgent. "There's a young boy loitering in front of my house, selling things without a permit. I don't know who he is or what he's up to, but I don't feel safe. You need to send someone immediately." Jamal had no idea what was coming. He continued serving customers, smiling and chatting, oblivious of storm brewing just a few doors down. But when the distant sound of sirens reached his ears, a chill ran down his spine. The commotion caught the attention of the neighbors, and within moments, a squad car pulled up to the curb. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions unreadable as they approached. Jamal swallowed hard, gripping the edge of his table. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Was he? Karen smirked from her porch, watching with satisfaction as the officers approached the stand. "Finally," she muttered under her breath, expecting them to shut the boy down. "Is this your lemonade stand, son?" one of the officers asked, his voice firm but not unkind. Jamal nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I'm just trying to save up for a bike. I didn't think I needed a permit." His voice wavered slightly, but he held his ground. The officers exchanged glances before turning to Karen, who was now marching over with a smug expression. "Well, officer, I hope you'll be handling this. This isn't a flea market," she huffed, folding her arms. "We have laws in this neighborhood, and I don't want strangers hanging around my property." The officer nearest to her tilted his head. "Ma'am, you do realize this is a child selling lemonade?" Karen scoffed. "A child who is loitering and bringing in all kinds of traffic. Who knows what kind of people this will attract? This isn't safe. You need to shut this down." Jamal's heart pounded as he looked at the officers. Were they going to take everything away? Would they fine him? His fingers trembled slightly as he tightened his grip on the plastic pitcher in front of him. The second officer let out a slow breath and then did something no one expected. He pulled out his wallet. "How much for a cup?" he asked. Jamal blinked. 50 cents? The officer grinned. "I'll take 4, he said, placing a $20 bill on the table. "Keep the change." Karen's jaw dropped. What are you doing?" she sputtered. The first officer smirked. "Supporting a hard-working young man. There's no crime in that." A murmur of approval rose from the small crowd that had gathered. The elderly woman from earlier clapped her hands, and soon more neighbors were coming forward, forming a small line at the stand. Karen's face turned red. "This is ridiculous. You are supposed to be shutting him down." The officer raised an eyebrow. "For what exactly, ma'am? Selling lemonade? Being an enterprising young man? It's people like him who grow up to be business owners, entrepreneurs. You should be proud that he's learning responsibility so early." Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her moment of triumph had crumbled before her eyes. Jamal felt a warmth spread through his chest. He had been afraid the officers would take everything away, but instead, they had defended him. He wasn't just standing behind a lemonade stand. He was standing up for himself. And now, the whole neighborhood was standing with him. Karen turned on her heel and stormed back to her house, her entire body trembling with rage. This wasn't over. If the police wouldn't do something about that boy, then she would take matters into her own hands. She grabbed her phone once more and scrolled through her contacts, landing on the name she needed. A wicked smile curled on her lips as she pressed the call button. "I have a job for you," she said in a low voice. "That little brat thinks he can get away with this? Let's see how he likes it when he wakes up to a ruined lemonade stand." Jamal had won today, but Karen wasn't finished yet, and what was coming next would change everything. That night, as the neighborhood settled into a quiet hum of crickets and distant car engines, Jamal lay in bed, exhausted but proud. His little lemonade stand had turned into something bigger than he had imagined. Not just a way to earn money for a bike, but a lesson in perseverance. He smiled as he counted his earnings, tucking the bills safely into a shoebox under his bed. Tomorrow, he'd be back out there, ready to keep going. But tomorrow would bring something else. A sudden crash outside sent a jolt of fear through Jamal's chest. He sat up, his heart pounding. Then another crash, the sound of plastic scraping against pavement. He jumped out of bed and rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain just in time to see two shadowy figures kicking over his lemonade stand, stomping on the wooden planks, and pouring out what was left of the lemonade onto the ground. One of them had a bat, swinging it wildly until the entire stand lay in ruins. Jamal's breath caught in his throat, his fists clenched. Who would do this? Then he saw her, standing at the edge of her porch, arms folded, watching with satisfaction, was Karen. Jamal's stomach twisted with anger. This wasn't just some random act of vandalism. This was her doing. She couldn't stand that he had won today, so she was making sure he didn't win tomorrow. His mother rushed into the room, breathless. "Jamal? What was that noise?" He turned to her, his eyes stinging with frustration. "Mom, they destroyed my stand." Her face darkened as she moved to the window. The two men had disappeared, but the damage was done. The wood lay shattered. The money jar was missing, and the remnants of his hard work were scattered all over the street. She exhaled sharply and pulled him close. "We'll figure this out, baby. I promise." But Jamal wasn't sure how. His hard work had been taken from him in an instant, all because a woman with too much power and too much hate couldn't stand to see him succeed. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers as people saw the wreckage. The same people who had supported him yesterday were now shaking their heads in disgust. But not at him, at what had been done. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman who had encouraged him the day before, stepped onto her porch, her sharp eyes scanning the mess. "This wasn't an accident," she muttered. "Somebody did this on purpose." Jamal swallowed his anger, staring at the ruined pieces of his dream. But he wasn't about to give Karen the satisfaction of seeing him quit. By noon, a small crowd had gathered, neighbors, customers, and even the two officers from yesterday. "Jamal," one of them said, kneeling down to him, "you have any idea who might have done this?" Jamal hesitated. He knew. He had seen her standing there, watching, but saying it outright without proof, that would only give Karen more reason to twist the story. "I don't know," he said quietly, his fists still clenched. "But I'm not giving up." The officer gave him a nod of approval. "That's the spirit, kid." Karen, watching from her window, smirked. She thought she had broken him, but she was wrong. Jamal and his mother spent the rest of the day picking up the pieces. But just when he thought he'd have to start from scratch, something unexpected happened. One by one, neighbors started bringing supplies. A wooden crate here, a signboard there, cups, pitchers, even a new jar to replace the one that had been stolen. Mrs. Thompson brought over a roll of bills. "To help you start fresh," she said with a warm smile. "We won't let them win." Jamal's throat tightened with emotion. He hadn't just gained customers. He had gained a community, a family that wouldn't let him fail. By sundown, a brand new lemonade stand stood where the old one had been, stronger than before. Painted bright yellow with bold black letters reading, "Jamal's Lemonade, better than ever." Karen's smirk faded as she watched from her window, her nails digging into her palm. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to be humiliated, defeated. She grabbed her phone and made another call. "This isn't over," she hissed. "If the police won't shut him down, then I will." A dark voice chuckled on the other end. "Don't worry. I got something special planned for him." Jamal thought the worst had passed. He had no idea that what was coming next would make everything before seem like child's play. That night, the air was thick with eerie silence. Jamal lay in bed, exhausted but hopeful. The way the neighborhood had come together to rebuild his stand had given him a renewed sense of strength. He closed his eyes, imagining the success of his new and improved lemonade stand. Then, a faint rustling outside made his eyelids snap open. At first, he thought it was the wind, but then he heard something else, a low, deliberate movement, like someone creeping through the yard. His breath hitched. Slowly, he slid out of bed and tiptoed to the window. What he saw sent a bolt of fear through his spine. A figure dressed in black stood near his lemonade stand, crouched low as they fiddled with something near the base. Another person stood a few feet away, looking out as if to make sure no one was watching. Jamal's stomach clenched. They were messing with his stand. Again, his fingers shook as he reached for his phone, ready to dial 911. But just as he pressed the first button, something flickered in the dark. A flame. His eyes widened in horror. The crouched figure lit what looked like a small rag, soaked in something. Gasoline? His mind screamed at him to move, to shout, to do something, but his body was frozen in disbelief. Then, the figure tossed a burning rag at the base of the stand, and within seconds, flames roared to life. Jamal finally found his voice. "Emma!" His shout was loud enough to shake the walls. His mother burst into the room, just as Jamal turned and sprinted for the front door. "Jamal, wait!" she cried, but he was already outside, running toward the stand as the fire grew larger, consuming the fresh wood, licking up the sides of the banner that had been painted just hours ago. The arsonists turned, their faces obscured by dark hoodies. For a brief moment, Jamal saw one of them hesitate. Then, without warning, they bolted, disappearing into the shadows. His mother grabbed him before he could get too close. "Jamal, no. It's too dangerous." Tears of rage burned in his eyes as he watched everything he had worked for go up in smoke. The fire crackled violently, the once bright yellow sign now nothing more than curling, blackened ashes. Neighbors rushed out of their homes. Someone grabbed a hose. Another person called the fire department. But it was too late. By the time the fire was put out, there was nothing left. Jamal stood there, fists clenched so tightly his nails dug into his palms. His heart pounded with a mix of grief and fury. And then, like a vulture circling fresh prey, Karen stepped onto her porch, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. Jamal's head snapped toward her. His entire body shook. He knew she was behind this. But how could he prove it? The officers from before arrived moments later, stepping through the crowd to assess the scene. One of them, Officer Ramirez, crouched near the charred remains, his face grim. "This wasn't an accident," he muttered. "Somebody set this deliberately." Jamal's blood boiled. He turned, locking eyes with Karen. "It was her," he blurted out, his voice shaking. "She did this." The crowd gasped. Karen's smirk faltered for a second before she scoffed. "Oh, please," she said, feigning offense. "You really think I have time to sneak around at night, burning lemonade stands? Grow up. You wanted me gone." Jamal shot back. "You tried to get the police to shut me down. And when that didn't work, you sent someone to destroy my first stand. And now this." Karen folded her arms. "Do you have any proof, boy?" she sneered, emphasizing the last word in a way that made the air around them go still. Jamal felt the sting of her words, but he didn't back down. "You were watching the first time, smirking, and I saw you watching tonight, too." The officer beside Ramirez, a tall, no-nonsense woman named Officer Daniels, narrowed her eyes. "Ma'am, where were you tonight between 11 and midnight?" Karen's face twisted. "Are you seriously questioning me? This is outrageous. I was home, obviously." Ramirez stood up. "And do you have anyone who can verify that?" Karen hesitated. The moment was brief, but it was enough. Ramirez caught it. Daniels caught it. Jamal caught it. The tension in the air thickened. The neighborhood was no longer just watching. They were waiting. Karen scoffed. "I don't have to prove anything. You people." She stopped herself too late. A sharp silence followed. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman who had always supported Jamal, stepped forward, shaking her head. "You people," she echoed, her voice dripping with disappointment. Karen paled. "That's not what I meant." Ramirez's gaze hardened. "Ma'am, we'll be conducting an investigation, and if we find any connection between you and whoever did this—" "Oh, give me a break." Karen snapped. "This is a waste of time. It's just a stupid lemonade stand." Jamal's mother stepped forward, her eyes blazing with fury. "That stupid lemonade stand was my son's dream, and you've tried to crush it twice." Karen rolled her eyes. "I don't have to listen to this." She turned, heading back toward her house. But she didn't get far, because just then, a voice rang out from the crowd. "I saw them." A hush fell over the street as all eyes turned toward a man standing near the back. A young man in his 20s, wearing a hoodie and jeans. Karen froze. The man took a step forward. "I saw who set the fire," he said, his voice steady. "And I know who sent them." Jamal's heart pounded. Karen's face turned ghostly pale. Officer Daniels crossed her arms. "Go on." The young man exhaled, then pointed directly at Karen. It was her. Karen's eyes widened in horror. "That's a lie. I don't even know this man." The man smirked. "Oh, you do?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "And I have the text to prove it." Karen stumbled back, her breath hitching. No, this isn't." Officer Ramirez stepped forward. "Ma'am, I think you need to come with us." The crowd erupted into murmurs. Karen's reign of terror was unraveling before their eyes. But Jamal wasn't celebrating yet, because he knew something Karen didn't. This wasn't over. Not yet. Karen's face twisted in shock as a young man held up his phone, the screen glowing with undeniable proof. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Officer Ramirez took a step forward, his tone firm. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." Karen backed up, shaking her head wildly. "No, this is ridiculous. You can't arrest me over some fake text messages." "He's lying." The young man smirked, unfazed. "Oh, I'm lying? Let's see what your fake texts say." He tapped the screen, and the unmistakable sound of a voice recording filled the air. Karen's own voice, clear as day, snarled through the speaker. "I don't care how you do it. Just make sure that little brat never sells lemonade on this street again. I want that stand gone." Silence fell over the crowd. Karen's face turned ghost white. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. It was over. Officer Daniels pulled out her handcuffs. "Karen Matthews, you're under arrest of conspiracy to commit arson and destruction property." "No, this is a setup." Karen screeched, thrashing as the officers grabbed her. "You people are out to get me. I was only trying to keep the neighborhood safe from—" "From what?" Jamal's mother interrupted, stepping forward. "From my son? A 12-year-old trying to make an honest living? You should be ashamed of yourself." The neighbors murmured in agreement, shaking their heads. Even the ones who had stayed silent before now turned their backs on Karen. As the officers led her toward the squad car, she twisted around, desperate for someone to defend her. But no one did. She had spent years looking down on others, thinking she was untouchable. And now, no one stood by her side. Before getting into the police car, she locked eyes with Jamal, hatred burning behind her gaze. "This isn't over," she hissed. Jamal, standing tall, met her glare without fear. "Yes, it is." The door slammed shut. The squad car pulled away. And just like that, Karen was gone. The crowd erupted into cheers. Mrs. Thompson wiped a tear from her eye. "Justice, baby. That's justice." Jamal's mother pulled him into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you, baby. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You showed everyone what real strength looks like." Jamal smiled. He had won. Not just a fight for his lemonade stand, but something bigger, the fight for respect, for dignity, for the right to chase his dreams without being torn down. The next morning, with the sun shining bright, Jamal set up a brand new stand, this time even bigger and better. The whole neighborhood came out to support him. As he handed Mrs. Thompson a fresh cup of lemonade, She took a sip and grinned. MMM, sweeter than victory. Jamal beamed. And as more customers lined up, dropping bills into his new tip jar, he knew one thing for sure. No one was ever going to stop him again. Karen calls cops on black kids selling lemonade. Their response leaves her speechless. If you love this story and believe in standing up for what's right, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment below, and tell us what you think about Karen finally getting what she deserved. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that prove justice always wins in the end.